the shores of old Lake Erie stands our alma mater true. Fredonia state we proudly honor, with its colors white and blue.
Hello, and welcome to our latest episode of Reflections of Fredonia. Let me introduce myself first. I am Jack Croxton, and I am a retired professor of psychology. I came here in 1979 and retired just a couple of years ago. So in retirement, I was thinking what might be some fun things to do. And I reflected back on my over 40 years as a professor here and all the wonderful students that I've had an opportunity to interact with. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun to follow up with some of the Fredonia alumni and chat with them about what they're up to these days, and also to let them think a little bit about their life when they were a student here at Fredonia. So today's podcast is taking place at the Fredonia Radio Systems, Fredonia's student-run radio station.
Hello, my name is Chloe Kowalik. I graduated from Fredonia in May of 2024, and while I was a student here, I was a double major in communications journalism and psychology, and I had minors in English and political science.
So for today's podcast, we have a very special guest. So Steve, why don't you introduce yourself, give us your name and the year you graduated from Fredonia.
My name is Steve Keefe. I graduated from Fredonia State in 1983.
Perfect. So before you attended Fredonia, we saw on your little bio that you were in the military for a number of years. What was that experience like?
It was kind of a mixed type of thing. It was, I joined at 19, and it was during the Vietnam War, and I was a hospital corpsman. So I started out seeing a lot of injured people that had just come back from Vietnam, and a lot of, wounds, mental distress, kind of curious types of situations. And so that was my first 2 years. My second 2 years, I was in an air squadron out of Brunswick, Maine. And that was kind of fun. I got to go to Bermuda, Spain, Portugal, Bermuda. I was stationed in Bermuda for a while, Puerto Rico. So, that was kind of a nice adventure, just flying around, looking at where submarines might be. I didn't have to fly because I was a corpsman. I was a medic, so I was mainly in charge of giving shots and making sure that people's records were taken care of and their health care was maintained. But I could jump on a plane and go wherever I wanted to just for the fun of it.
That is cool.
It was, yeah.
So at that time in your life, did you ever imagine that one day you would be a high school principal or the mayor of a village?
No, but one of the people I was stationed with when I in Maine was from Chautauqua County, and he lived in Jamestown. So one time when I was hitchhiking through here, I stopped by and I met him. He had a place in Brockton on the lake, a little cabin, and so I got to look at Fredonia before I ever thought I would even live here. We had a beer or two at the old Pizza Hut on Route 60, and then I went back on the road again and took off, and never thought I would ever live here, but ended up living here.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how stuff like that happens.
Who would have predicted?
Right.
So Steve, what did you study while you were a student here at Fredonia?
I was an English major, and I started out, I was more interested in journalism, writing, creative writing, but someone suggested to me, I was married and had 3 children when I was going to college, so it was kind of a hectic time for me. I was a bartender at night and did a lot of odd jobs, but one night in a bar that I was bartending at, a young lady was there, and she was a teacher, and she said, "You ever think about going into teaching?" And I said, "No, I'd never thought about that." And she says, "Well, if you want to get the certification, it's not that difficult." And I thought, well, maybe I'll do that. So I got my certification in education, and it paid off. I got myself, a teaching position, went into administration, and my career kind of did all right.
Absolutely. So I have to ask, where were you a bartender?
Well, quite a few places: the Vineyard Country Club, the Vineyard Restaurant, the White Inn.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, American Legions.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
Never had to worry about my nightlife.
That's
guess
true.
not.
That's true.
Oh.
Awesome. So, how did you end up coming back to Fredonia? Like, what made you want to come here? Especially how we just talked about, you had been here before but never imagined being a student.
Well, I was on a motorcycle ride from Maine to Moorhead, Kentucky. I was going to go to college in Moorhead. I'm from Kentucky originally. And when I was leaving Maine, I decided I was going to take a little bit of a scenic tour through Canada and down through the Thousand Islands area.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a friend that lived in Rochester, New York. So I stopped off to visit my friend in Rochester, and he had this friend and introduced me to her, and she turned out to be my wife in later years.
Aw.
So I met her in Rochester. She was a beautician, and we kind of hung around a bit. In fact, I was kind of knocked off my feet by her.
Oh.
She was a knockout, I thought at the time, and still is to me. But
Yeah, I'm sure you are hoping she'll listen to this podcast.
well, I'm going to try
After
to
all those compliments.
Yeah, I'm going to try to convince her.
Aw.
But we met, and we kind of hung around together, and then I took off toward Moorhead, and at the same time, she was going down for the Kentucky Derby, and this was Derby Day weekend, where I was leaving Rochester, and she was going down with my friend to watch the Derby, and she says, "Well, how about if you are my date for the Derby?" And I thought, well, that'd be a great idea. But here I am coming down on two wheels, and it's pouring rain, a little bit of sleet, nasty weather. It's the first weekend of May is the Derby.
Yep.
So, I was soaking wet, and I decided that I couldn't go any further on the highway. So I got off in Ohio someplace and slept under this viaduct for quite a while. The next morning, it was Derby Day, and I drove on to Louisville. And by the time I got there, I was exhausted, so I went home and fell asleep and didn't wake up for the Derby. And so I stood her up for our first date.
Oh, no.
But she was in Louisville for a few days, and in a hurry, or a tornado had just tore through Kentucky,
Mm-hmm.
just right before that. So we rode around on my motorcycle and looked at all the sites that had been torn up by the tornado,
Mm-hmm.
and we had a fairly nice time there. Then I headed off to Moorhead to go to school, and I had a chance. My brother was a priest at the time, and well, he was a priest, but he died just a few years ago. But I had the chance. He was taking some kind of one of his things that priests do up in Niagara Falls. So I decided to go up and see this occasion with him in Niagara Falls, and Janet came over and met me in Niagara Falls. And so, I kind of looked at that as our honeymoon in Niagara Falls. She didn't look at it the same way. She said, "No, I'll visit you there, but that's what we're going to do." And then later, she was going to travel the country, and she went to Moorhead and visited me, and headed toward Florida, and then came back up to Moorhead, and we decided to get married, and had first child in Moorhead, and her mother passed away when she was 9 months pregnant. And at that point, we decided, maybe you should be around family. So we moved up to Fredonia, and I transferred. I was going to transfer to Fredonia State. I wasn't able to do that for quite a few years. It took me 10 years to finally finish my degree. But, that's how we ended up in Fredonia.
Wow, yeah. Definitely a little bit of a crazy journey, but
Right.
you're here.
Right, right. And I
True.
fell in love with Fredonia immediately. I kind of liked the pace of the place. I was raised in a city, and I loved the pace. I liked the Four Seasons, the lake right there, which was an ocean to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought this is a nice place to live, and decided to make it home.
Yeah.
And Janet has actually put up with you for all these years.
Yeah, yeah. Well, she calls that sainthood.
So in terms of memories or experiences while you were a student, I mean, were there any particular professors that
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
stand out in your mind?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've got a list of those. Tristan Bernard was an English, professor. And in fact, I was coaching his son in baseball at the same time that I was going to school and bartending. And, you know, Tristan used to say, after class, Mr. Keefe, would you stay after class for a couple of minutes? And I'd say, well, sure, So I'd stay after class, and he'd say, "How about a glass of bourbon?" And he'd pour me a little bit of Jim Beam, my favorite, and it's still my favorite. So we'd sit and talk and discuss, politics, different things like that, and really enjoyed him. Then Mac Nelson, my professor in Shakespeare, who always had always impressed me with everything that he ever did. Pat Quartz, Terry Mosier, I think, and Phil Morris, just a collection of people that were knowledgeable, sincere, nice, genuine people, made for a quality education.
Great, great.
So we also saw that you studied at the University of North Wales for some time.
Right.
What was that experience like?
It was pretty good. My first teaching job was at the county jail. I worked for BOCES, and so I had this job in the county jail. And there were things that kind of impressed me. And one of the things that really, got my attention is the number of people that were in the county jail that had very low reading levels. And, I was talking to this one kid one day, and he says, I may not be able to read or write, but I could steal your car in 5 minutes. And I'm thinking, well, that's a high-level skill. And I'm, especially with the locking steering wheels and all the different technologies that come in.
Yeah.
And I said, well, how do you know how to do this? And he says, well, I can look at pictures and I can talk to people and I can figure out things pretty easily. I'm good with my hands. I just, not a good reader. So there was a gentleman that was the minister at the jail, and he was also a Rotarian. And he said, have you ever thought about going through the Rotary for a scholarship? And I was at the situation where I needed to get my master's before I could get my permanent certification, and I really couldn't afford more education. Even though I did have the GI Bill for the bachelor's, I really didn't have any money saved up for a master's. So I applied for a scholarship through the Rotary, and they asked me what I was interested in, and I said reading disabilities. And so they searched around. They did a nice job. They found this gentleman that at the University of North Wales who worked with dyslexia, and he was a kind of a leading pioneer in the field. His name was Terry Miles, and he was Professor Miles. He was kind of like the odd professor. He was looked like Einstein, hair going all over the place, and kind of a scattered individual, but brilliant in the field of dyslexia. And he'd always say to me, we'd have classes, and there were never very many people in them. It was kind of an international class. I had a good friend from Uganda named Mitty, and a good friend from Trinidad named Raphael. And, we'd hang around quite a bit together. But he'd always say, well, with dyslexia, it's people that have trouble with words. You know what I mean, right, Steve? And he's looking at me, and I'm saying, oh, well, yeah, I guess, And he was always kind of convinced that probably I had the tendency to confuse things up, a little bit. And I think he was probably right. But, so I got to study under a gentleman that was really, kind of the founding father in the field.
So I know that after that you did work at BOCES,
right,
for a while.
Mm-hmm.
What kinds of things were you doing at BOCES?
I was mostly working with, like I said, I started out in the jail. Then I started working with students that have been kicked out of different school districts. So alternative education was my field for 20 years, working with children with different learning mechanisms, different attitudes, different personalities. And, kind of a rewarding thing. It was, it had its frustrations, but it also had, its successes. And when you saw the successes, when you could see when somebody got the idea of something, it was really kind of an inspiring position. Mm-hmm. But I really enjoyed that. And because I got into education later in life, I thought, I should think about how to, work my way up in the pay scale. And that's why I went into administration. And it really helped me out a lot as far as being able to retire, at some point in my life where I thought I would never be able to retire. So I went into administration, and I was a principal at Brockton for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, speaking about that, tell us a little bit about what that experience was like and what you did there.
At Brockton?
Yes, at Brockton.
Okay. Well, it was it was a small school, which I loved. It was a small school. You know everybody. You know all the students. You know the staff. And I had a very good staff and a good population of students. And, at one point or another, I was a principal for all the different levels. At one point, I was K through 12 principal. So I was elementary part of the day, middle school part of the day, high school part of the day, involved in all the activities. Never had anything to worry about what I was going to do at night because there was always a ball game. There was always, an event, a dance. Kept myself pretty involved in the social part, the activities part. It was a nice position. I really enjoyed it.
In a very short amount of time, what would you say was the most gratifying and most frustrating part of being a high school principal?
Trying to convince some parents that maybe their child really did do it. I can think of times, we had video cameras. We went technology, and I had a video camera of a kid doing something, stealing something out of a locker. I had him on videotape. And so I had his mother there, and she says, well, normally I would believe you, but this time I think I'm going to go with my son. so I showed him the video, and the kid says, I said, is that you going into that locker? And he says, yeah. And I said, is that your locker? He says, no. And I said, that Walkman you're taking out of the locker, is that your Walkman? No. And I said, so you stole that Walkman that day? He says, well, I wasn't wearing that shirt that day. And the mother said, at this point, I believe my son.
Oh, wow.
But, that was kind of an isolated type of situation, not the norm.
Right.
So you're also super involved in local politics. So you served as a Village of Fredonia trustee for 3 years, a Chautauqua County legislator for 9 years, and Village of Fredonia mayor for 5 years. So why did you choose to get involved in local politics?
Well, in the original part of it, the mayor, when I was, the mayor called me one day, and I didn't know him. He didn't know me. It was Frank Pagano, who, we're very close friends now. Mm-hmm. And Frank said, he said, I don't really know you, and I don't know what political party you're a member of, and it didn't really matter to me at all what political party you are, but people tell me that you're, kind of an all right person. Would you be interested in running for a political position? And I said, well, I don't know. I've never done anything like that before, but I'd have to get my wife, to give her blessings. So I went and talked to Janet, and she said, well, if you want to do it, go ahead. So I went back, and I said, well, she said I could do it, so, maybe I'll run for trustee. And being from out of town with a kind of a different accent than the average person in the neighborhood, I didn't really think that I would probably get elected, but I worked pretty hard at it. And when the election came, I did get the position. Some people said it's because Janet had 11 brothers and sisters, and all those 11 brothers and sisters had kids and relatives and friends and neighbors, and that's probably why you got elected. And I could probably blame that. I could probably say that's it. And then from there, someone stepped down from a position as a county legislator and asked me if I could take his position. So I took his position, and those elections are every 2 years. And so for every 2 years I ran. And when it got to the point where my education job got so complicated with being a K through 12 principal, and I was also director of special education and had all these other things on my plate, I said, I've got to stop something. So I gave up the politics. And then when I retired, they asked me if I'd run for mayor. And I said, I'm retired, I'm having the time of my life. Here I am. I get up in the morning and I drink my coffee and I take as long as I can drinking my coffee. I chase my 2 grandkids around the house. I'm a man in his glory. And my wife says, yeah, but you're driving me crazy. And she says, I can handle 2 kids, but these 3, it's getting to be too much. So she says, why don't you run? So I did it as a favor this time for my wife. I ran for mayor. And, I lucked out and I got the position.
Now, let me ask you a similar question. So what did you find most gratifying and most frustrating about being in politics?
Well, the most gratifying is people would invite me to parties. Usually nobody invited me to anything except for groundhog parties. But with this, I got invited to almost every event that was going on. We even got to go to the White House. When Alonzo Cushing got the Congressional Medal of Honor, Janet and I went to the White House on her birthday to get the congressional, or to see the Congressional Medal of Honor being given out. So we were in the room with Michelle and Barack Obama. It was the time of our lives. We got to go to the Pentagon. So that was probably the best thing. We even traveled to Wisconsin because the Cushing brothers had been born in Wisconsin. So we went to their hometown also. But that was, kind of a spectacular thing. But at the same time I was mayor, Carriage House closed down, which was an economic kick to the community. And we worked hard to keep them here. And up to the last minute, the CEO kept saying to me, we have no intentions of leaving. The union kept saying to us, they're going to leave. They're going to close their doors, and they're going to leave us out in the cold. And the CEO said, no, we're not going to leave. So, I had people from the governor's office, from the, senator's office, from every representative that I could come in with to convince them to stay, and offered them everything we could possibly offer them. And they said, no, we're happy here. And then they just slammed the doors. So that was most frustrating.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I wanted to say one thing you didn't put on the information that you gave us is your rather extensive background in community theater. I wonder if you might just tell us a little bit about your acting prowess.
Well, many, many years ago, a friend of mine, Albert Sorcy, needed somebody with a Southern accent to play a part. And he was doing this play, and he needed somebody to play a country western singer that wore a cowboy hat and cowboy boots. And he was going to do a one-act show for JCC, and it was a competitive show. And he asked me, he says, well, you got a Southern accent. I don't know what else you got, but can you give me a helping hand with this? So I said, sure. So I helped him out with it, and we won. We won the competition at JCC. And so after that, I got asked again to play a part. And so over the years, I've played a few parts. Mm-hmm. And, it's kind of nice to be in somebody else other than me for a little bit.
Right. Yeah. Well, and of course, you performed in some pretty brilliant plays that were written having to do with Groundhog Day.
Oh, yeah. The Groundhog Day celebrations, are kind of renowned around here. And I think, I don't think you can have enough repetition of groundhogs coming over and over again. So.
Yeah. Were you close with Dunkirk Dave?
I've never met him, but I think if we ever did, we'd be on a first-name basis.
I think so, too.
We actually had a little group that I was in, and every Groundhog Day, we would put on a play for people, for mainly friends and family. In fact, we did one. I was generally the one that would write up these plays. And I have to say, the writing was generally brilliant. The performances were a little mediocre.
Right. Unfortunately, he had me sing in one of them, and
That's right.
And rather than celebrating my voice, people were kind of rolling around in the floors laughing.
That's right. We did one called Abacadabra, Beauty and the Groundhog.
Oh, wow.
And so it was a series of ABBA songs that we that we did, and Steve did the one, I think, I do.
Yeah.
And yeah, it almost literally brought the house down.
Well, it brought the
I
guy
love
with
it.
it brought the guy with the cue cards down on the floor, rolling in the floor, and
I
I couldn't
Yeah.
read the cue cards to sing the words.
That's so funny.
But we had fun.
Absolutely.
The time at Fredonia, how do you feel it kind of shaped your career, or what do you think helped you by attending Fredonia?
Well, you know, I've thought about this my whole life. You know, I came from a background. My mother was born in Bear Waller, Kentucky, you know. My father was someplace from Louisville, but I'm not sure where. But neither one of them were educated. And to me, education is the equalizer. You know, I was working factories, I was working all kinds of odd jobs until I received my bachelor's degree. And after that, my life kind of got a nice steady cruise to it, a nice steady course.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I graduated. My wife graduated at 49 years old with my oldest son. My second son graduated from Fredonia State. My daughter graduated from Fredonia State. My daughter-in-law graduated from Fredonia State. Her father graduated from Fredonia State. And now I've got a grandson, Steve Keefe, as a sophomore at Fredonia State. So,
That's awesome.
right. So Fredonia State's meant a lot to us, and education, I think, is the most important, equalizer in our society. You know, it's gotten to the point where the one thing you can discriminate against is a lack of education. You can say, do you have the right paperwork? And if you don't have the right paperwork, you can lose a job. If you have your paperwork in place, then it opens doors.
Right.
Absolutely. So I just wanted to note that you're a member of the Fredonia College Council, and you're still very involved today. So kind of in that position, do you have any advice that you would offer for current Fredonia students?
Tell your friends about the golden opportunity of attending Fredonia State. Go home when you go on vacations and recruit people for Fredonia State. Make sure that this school, thrives in the future. But I think that, we have something here that's worth marketing. Like I say, I think the community is great. The college is great. And it gives us, something, it's the heart and soul of the community. You've got something you could do any night of the week here on campus. Yeah, I would say to every student, recruit your friends and neighbors and stay on course. Just do what you need to do, put a foot forward each and every day, and be successful.
True words of wisdom.
I agree.
Well, I think that just about wraps up our interview for today. But Steve, anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I could sing an ABBA song.
I would love that.
We'll be terminating this podcast
okay.
immediately.
I wanted to hear it, but okay.
Well, thank you so much, Steve, for coming in and talking to us today. It was a lot of fun. And I am Dr. Jack Croxton.
And I'm Chloe Kowalik, and we'll see you in the next podcast.
Sing its glory and its praises. Let them ring forever true. Beloved is our alma mater, Fredonia State.